Hey, Pete, have you ever been fascinated by the allure of secret societies throughout history?
Are you kidding me right now, Andy? I live for this stuff. From the Freemasons to the Illuminati, I am obsessed with these clandestine groups. The Rosicrucians and their ancient wisdom, the Skull and Bones Society at Yale with its powerful alumni network. I'm drawn to them. There's something about how they offer this exclusive access to hidden knowledge. They totally capture my imagination. It's like they give this sense of belonging to something greater than oneself.
Wow, sounds like you're looking for one yourself.
Do you even need to ask? Where do I sign? How much blood do I have to give? Are there any required tattoos or brands involved? Is it my first or second born that they need?
Well, what if I told you that there's a secret society for film lovers right here at the Next Reel family of film podcasts, all proud members of the True Story FM network, and you don't have to give any blood or either of your kids?
You've got my attention, Andy. What can you tell me about this cinematic brotherhood?
When you become a member of the Next Reel family, you gain access to a treasure trove of exclusive content, early episode releases, and a community of passionate film enthusiasts who share your love for movies. It's like being initiated into a secret order where you're privy to the inner workings of our shows, including the Next Reel, the Film Board, Movies We Like, Sitting in the Dark, and CinemaScope.
But Andy, as a member, will I unlock a world of bonus content from extended conversations and behind-the-scenes insights to exclusive pre-show and post-show discussions that expand the conversations about the films we love?
Why, yes, the true power of this secret society lies in its community. As a member, you'll join an exclusive group within our Discord community where you can engage in clandestine conversations with other passionate film fans in our members-only channels.
But what about live recordings, Andy? The sacred rituals of any good cinematic order. Will these episodes be scheduled in advance so that members like me will know when to gather around the virtual pyre in real time via YouTube?
Ah, yes. Perhaps the greatest secret of all is that by becoming a member, you're not just investing in your own entertainment, you're also supporting the tireless work of our independent creators and helping to keep the magic of cinema alive and well. So if you're ready to join this elite group of film lovers and unlock the secrets of cinema, head over to truestory.fm/join. For just $5 a month or $55 a year, you will gain access to a world of exclusive content, engaging discussions, and a community that shares your passion for movies. Head to truestory.fm/join to sign up.
Andy, I can't wait for you to welcome me into the inner circle of the Next Reel family of film podcasts. I'll see you in the secret chambers. Now, when do I get my ring?
Well, we don't actually offer rings with your membership.
Tattoos or brands? When can I do that?
No tattoos.
Secret handshakes?
Tell you what, you and I can come up with our own secret handshake, okay?
No, I mean, at the very least.
Welcome to CinemaScope, where we venture into the heart-pounding, nerve-shredding depths of cinema's horror landscapes. I'm Andy Nelson, your guide as we navigate the shaky, grainy world of found footage horror. Today, we'll be exploring the origins, evolution, and enduring impact of this bone-chilling subgenre that blurs the line between fiction and reality, creating an immersive and unsettling experience that lingers long after the final frame. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind found footage horror's ability to transform everyday technology into a source of terror, making us question the very nature of what we see on screen. So grab your camera and brace yourself, because we're about to embark on a journey into the unknown, where every shaky step and panicked breath is captured in terrifying detail. Joining me today is Disconnected. That's hard to say. Is Disconnected's Ryan Verrill, podcaster, producer, and publisher of the Physical Media Advocate. Ryan, welcome to the show. I'm thrilled to have you.
An honor to be here. Genuinely appreciate the invite, and I'm stoked to have this conversation.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to talk about with this, and it's going to be fun. And I know your background, like you're a fan of horror to begin with, and so
yes.
In the scope of horror, I want to just, before we get into found footage, since we're specifically focusing on kind of found footage horror in that style of film, what drew you to horror? And then, like, on top of that, what draws you into kind of like that found footage style?
There is so much to answer with that. I mean, when I was younger, I was raised in a quite conservative religious household, and they still did what felt dangerous for things like this. So like I saw Child's Play way younger than I should have. My parents showed me Halloween when I was 8 years old, and I still remember finishing the movie and my entire body being stiff sitting on the couch because I was literally afraid to move. About a year before that, somebody in my family, an extended family member, had showed me Carrie, and I was like 6.5, 7 years old, not knowing why people were throwing tampons at this girl in the shower, let alone what a tampon was.
Yeah, sure.
So all these things building up into this very questioning time of I am truly enjoying movies and breaking these down and like spending time in these worlds. But then as I grew older, one of the reasons that drew me to horror is, and this is going to sound very, very depressing, so I apologize in advance, but going through a lot in a household that was kind of broken and not being able to be emotionally invested in a lot of things, I actually got a lot of feeling out of horror. So I started turning to some of these literally as like a solace to feel emotions in a way of like catharsis to challenge myself to empathize with others, especially growing up in a house where there was very little empathy. And it's been a really nice sort of sanctuary, I guess, in that way, because you can discover so much about yourself and about others and about other cultures. And, you know, that's the whole broad discussion on film in general. But even just for horror, there's this weird, I don't know, warm hug of we're all human and all of these feelings are valid.
Sure. That's, the sign of somebody who's done some work on themselves trying to figure all this out. That's great.
Yes.
What a way to kind of like wrap all of that up in such a kind of a personal way. I think that's really cool. Now, how about found footage? I mean, do you remember the first one that you saw?
Yeah, it's one of the big ones that we're going to be talking about quite a bit tonight, I'm sure. I think, like many other people, the Blair Witch Project is probably the one that really got me there. And it's one of those things where it felt more dangerous because of how it was filmed, and not even just the found footage aspect, but it was grungy. It felt like somebody's like, hey, we're just going to pull this out of the closet because we filmed it 3 weekends ago and let's watch this thing where my aunt was attacked or whatever. And something about this being, you know, not even necessarily a genre, because found footage in itself isn't a genre, but as a format, as I've gone through my film journey and learning what I like to learn about these things as much as I can, I really like I guess it's kind of a dumb decision of being a filmmaker and putting yourself in a corner and saying, well, you're stuck here, find a way out of it with your limited budget. And you're setting up these very tight walls for yourself. And with that aspect, if you're smart enough to be able to find a way that's coherent out of that corner, it can win. The hard part is with found footage, there's really high highs, but the vast majority of them are really low lows.
Yeah, that is the trick. I suppose we can talk about that as far as the horror genre anyway, because there are plenty of low lows in horror,
yes,
period. So that's just part of the nature. Before we kind of really get into the whole thing, I just want to just kind of get your impression. We're going to start talking broadly and then we'll get narrow. But I just want to get your impression on how you feel like this style has kind of impacted the horror landscape over, especially since Blair Witch, since that really kind of, pushed it so much into the spotlight.
Well, and even then, I think Blair Witch definitely made it something that was legitimate, which I think was sort of a question before that, because, we're going to talk about another one of these tonight that is found footage, but also kind of not. It's also like a mockumentary that really kind of set all of this in motion from decades prior. But the reality is, I think the idea behind found footage just freed up filmmakers to be able to make these with no budget. And that's the biggest thing, is if you can set out to make a film literally in your backyard with a handful of friends on a cell phone in 2009 and release that as a feature, which many filmmakers have, that's sort of this thing where it's removing the barriers of entry for all these people that, if they were born 15 years earlier, maybe couldn't ever be filmmakers, because most people have one of these, cell phones in their pocket that can shoot HD. But this format alone gives them sort of an excuse to not need great lighting. It gives them an excuse to not have, an elaborate set. You can literally be filming in a dry riverbed in your neighborhood and call it a film, and it works, and it could catch fire with the right age and fan base. And suddenly you're a horror legend that it can get any budget that they never would have been able to get without that.
Right. And it's interesting, on top of that, like you had mentioned to me as we were kind of planning this, that there's a documentary about found footage out there called The Found Footage Phenomenon, which is really interesting because one of the things that I found gratifying to hear, I think, is one of the directors talking about how all of what you just said is true, but it's a format that really requires you to work hard to make sure that it actually can play. Like, you actually have to really think about every single thing about, like, why is someone holding a camera here? I mean, that's the thing that I think that you hear most often about this is like, why are people still holding cameras at this point? It makes no sense to me. Like, that's a thing. And then just figuring out, like, working on like the performances and just making sure that as they're filming it, that the structure actually makes sense for something that feels like it just was naturally happening and they happen to be capturing it. And hearing that, I mean, it was gratifying because it made me think, okay, yeah, you can make it for a low budget, but it still requires you to work hard and still have to put in the effort to actually deliver like one of the good ones, right? And I think that's important.
When you boil this down, it really is just that dichotomy, right? It removes the barrier of entry to people that couldn't do this. But then on the other side of it, no, this really removes the barrier of entry to people that couldn't ever do this. And for some people, that's a great victory. For others, it's like, ooh, maybe there's a reason you couldn't do this.
Right. Another note that I think it's an important one is because I think you're right that this is definitely a style. It's a format that people can choose to like film it, just like animation or something like that. But what I have found as I've been kind of exploring this is that I really feel like because it is so useful to tell horror films this way, that I think that for the horror genre, I really think that kind of like the found footage style has become its own subgenre. I think you can fairly call it. There are so many of them out there. I think you can say in horror, it is kind of a found footage subgenre that people use under that umbrella.
Yeah, absolutely. And then now we're also seeing, especially with expanding technology and the everyday person being more used to technology, I guess is the best way to say that we're seeing like these screen life films, we're seeing more mockumentaries, we're seeing, you and I talked about streaming movies where, like Gonjiam Haunted Asylum or Deadstream, where somebody is live streaming and that turns into a horror movie, which is it by definition found footage? Not really, because nobody's finding it, but it's in a way, it's the same format, just given another device to be able to logically tell that story, which works. And it gives filmmakers another way to creatively use that, which is more and more common. I mean, we're streaming right now. Look at exactly how that works.
I know. Watch out behind you, by the way.
There's a lot of fear in this room, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think what you're talking about, and I think this is such an important part of this, is low budget, yes. Very independent, yes. A lot of that also comes with the changing in technologies. And I mean, in the examples that we'll have, like in the 80s and even the one Blair Witch, like you're kind of democratizing it because you're all of a sudden camera technology, editing technology, all of this has gotten so much more affordable. And suddenly, instead of having to buy film and be super concerned about, how fast we're shooting through the footage because we don't have that much money to buy another roll of film, or, we have to go rent a flatbed to edit this thing, suddenly we're in a position where like the technology and the tools have become so accessible where you can just teach this stuff in college classes. I mean, younger than college students, like kids are using a lot of this technology. And that's what I think is interesting that we've seen over the last several decades of just the advancement of technology and how it is allowed for those changes. And I think that's what's interesting about this format is you see those screen life styles or like the live stream sorts of styles, and it's almost is like a technological evolution of the found footage.
And one thing that's kind of cool about that exact same conversation is we saw this happen right before found footage exploded with SOV films as well. And a lot of people, they tend to look at shot on video films as a genre because just like found footage, it opened up the world to cult film essentially, and that skewed really horror generally. However, shot on video is just a format. It's not a genre. There's shot on video romantic comedies. There's shot on video alien invasion movies. There's everything that you can think of. There's shot on video fetish films, for God's sake, that like got wide releases that people actually saw. And so when you see, filmmakers that are making widely known, pretty decent horror movies at the age of like 13 that were shot on video, we did start to see a lot of the same thing with found footage. So especially around like 2006 to 2012, a lot of those movies that were not necessarily getting wide theatrical releases, but maybe getting, well known in the convention circuits or underground scenes. A lot of those movies were just sort of a hope and a prayer of somebody that suddenly had an HD capable cell phone and a semi-good idea, and found footage gave them the barrier that they needed to say, well, I'm stuck here and I think I can make a good movie with this specific idea as my basis. And for many, that's all they needed.
Yeah, right. They're with just that, they're able to kind of get something out there. And I think there is value to that. But again, it's when they're able to really smartly put it together, you end up starting, like even in the shot on video, that still applies. There are still crappy ones and good ones, right?
Tons.
Another element that I think is important with this found footage style is, and this also ties to like pseudo documentaries, mockumentaries, and this, but there's this blurring of lines between fiction and reality. And under the umbrella of horror, I think that does an exceptional job of creating an unsettling viewing experience, because suddenly you're like, is this real? Like, especially when you tie in some of the examples of things like Blair Witch's marketing campaign and things like that, that's like, wait a minute, was this actually footage that happened? Like, it makes you question, where is that line?
Not only that, especially because a lot of this truly started before the internet was so pervasive, you get a lot of films that are literally just reputations and a wish, basically. So, I mean, one of the biggest ones for a lot of people is like Faces of Death, which for lots of people in the 90s, it was my brother's friend gave me this videotape like under the bleachers after school one day, and I watched it, and I think they're all real. You should watch it because this is crazy. People are actually dying. And of course, like the vast majority of stuff in Faces of Death is not real. There are a couple things that are unsavory that we do know are at least exploitive, but it's come to the point where now you should be able to research a lot of that. But something like Blair Witch Project, likely not even truly possible in the 2025 realm of marketing and word traveling quickly in the way that it did back then. Even some of the things that got reputations for being so real that like people had to go to court. One of the ones that we're going to talk about tonight, it was so believable that they had to go prove that actors were still alive. Lucio Fulci had to do that for at least one of his movies as well. That wasn't found footage. It was just one of those things that people seeing some of these over-the-top effects, and one of the things that's a little more important for found footage is that it just feels that much more realistic because it's shot in a point of view way. People are just watching essentially somebody that they think is sadistic doing something terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fascinating element because that further blurs that line, right? Suddenly it's like now we're in the real world where we're having to defend ourselves in court about this fictional movie and what we've created. And I think that also, my last point before we kind of get into a little more is this nature of truth in the digital age, like today especially, like everything is, you're questioning absolutely everything. There's an interesting element with the rise of found footage and the way that we were given the opportunity to think about this stuff like, is this real or is this fake? how much has that kind of led to this place where we are now, where you're questioning everything. You can't trust anything you watch anymore.
Yeah, not only that, I mean, just the aspect of you're watching this essentially from your own two eyes. And I know you always are with the film, but because it's a point of view, you don't know where the screen stops and you start if you get truly immersed in some of these. And in all reality, some found footage that really nails that tone, it can be kind of difficult. And if you watch it in the right situation, and a lot of these not necessarily even on a theater screen is the right situation. In a dark room on a Tuesday night when it's kind of cold outside, it might be the perfect time for you to watch this on, a pretty decent sized TV and just go like, shit, am I actually lost in the forest as I'm watching this? It's pretty remarkable what they were able to accomplish with these.
No, it's crazy. It's wild. All right. Well, I'm going to introduce the 10 films that we're going to be talking about on the show tonight. We've got Cannibal Holocaust, The Blair Witch Project, Wreck, Paranormal Activity, Cloverfield, Lake Mungo, The Visit, Hell House LLC, Gunjam Haunted Asylum, and Host. The first 5 of those we are going to discuss on the main show, and our conversation about the other 5 will make up the member bonus segment for the episode. If you're interested in learning about membership so you can access the full conversation, visit truestory.fm/join and look for the Next Reel family of film podcasts. That's trustory.fm/join. One thing I want to talk about before we get into like the films and everything is a little bit about the origins. There was an episode on one of our other shows that we have called Sitting in the Dark. That's part of our family of film podcasts where each episode they kind of explore a different type of horror. And one of them was Tommy Metz III ran that episode, and it was called The Epistolary Tradition. And it was about exactly this. And looking at the epistolary tradition in literature, looking at novels like Dracula, Frankenstein, Call of Cthulhu, even up to things like Carrie. And one of my recent favorite examples is World War Z, An Oral History of the Zombie War, which is a fantastic book, very different from the movie. These are books that are written as if you're just reading journal entries, or in the case of Carrie, maybe like news articles, things like that. And they're telling a story in this way where we're kind of outside the story afterward, reading other people's thoughts about the goings on. And I think that's such an interesting way. They talk about that also in the world of found footage, is that this is something that you can, in the scope of art, you can kind of follow the thread of these types of things up to eventually we're getting some of these found footage experimentation. Filmmakers were experimenting with this back in like the 60s and 70s. And then really kind of gets to Cannibal Holocaust, which is largely credited as kind of being the pioneering found footage horror film, which sparked a lot of controversy, but definitely laid the groundwork for this subgenre. And, other early examples, the McPherson tape, The Last Broadcast, I didn't even realize it until I was like looking into all of this, but I realized, because I kind of always assumed that The Blair Witch Project was the first found footage film I also saw. And then as I was kind of doing my research, I was like, Alien Autopsy. Holy shit.
Yep.
I watched that when it was live, and Jonathan Frakes was like analyzing this footage with us. I was like, this is insane. And I'm like, it's totally fake. It's totally fake, but it's so fascinating. And I'm like, no, yeah, but it's not real. But it just like the way that they do the whole thing is, the whole idea for them is like, is this real or did somebody fake it? What do you think?
Right.
And it's like, it's fascinating. Like you see all of these early versions that were around, but it's just like, I don't know. It just hadn't caught on, but it had been in the ether.
Yeah, one more that I really want to shout out in that time frame, that if people listening have never seen it, highest of props to Man Bites Dog. For those that haven't seen it, it's a French movie about a serial killer that is walking around, essentially done as a mockumentary, and eventually like sort of goads the crew that is filming this mockumentary to get involved and sort of start to side with him. And it's super heinous, and it really kicks off that kind of like gross period of like 1995 to 2005 where there was a lot of these August Underground type of films where they're essentially just going around from a POV shot and torturing people in a way that's, they had an idea to do some really great in-camera effects that are incredible for the time for what they did. But now looking back, a lot of them are kind of cheesy, but it was just this weird, era of let's just make these super sadistic films that are shot from a point of view to make people feel super uncomfortable.
Yeah, even like there's a Japanese series that's called like the Guinea Pig series in the 80s where, short films, but still that same sort of thing. Like, let's make it look like we're really, torturing this woman, for 45 minutes. As she's the guinea pig, and it's kind of horrific that people would like even say, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's make it. I don't know. It's a fascinating way to kind of just explore humanity and the way that people think and what people do, I suppose, and making it look as real as possible in that way really kind of, it blurs some lines that makes you feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, you feel sort of sleazy. And even a couple of the ones on our list tonight, you definitely don't feel great when you walk away from them. And to be fair, though, that is the point. And like I mentioned when I was talking about why I love horror, a lot of these, that truly is sort of the defining feature. You walk away and you have this sinking feeling, or you like feel that film on your skin for like the next 3 days and you can't get it out of your head. It's one of those things that just lives with you for a little bit. And to be fair, for, I mentioned reputations earlier, that in yourself will give a reputation. If something sits with you for a good 3 to 5 days after you watch a movie, and suddenly it's a film that you'll dread watching again. And if you watch it again and you get that feeling again, a lot of people chase that feeling because it's something that still gets to them, and truly love it when I find a movie like that.
Oh, yeah. It's powerful. I remember, this is just kind of an aside, but I remember Terry Gilliam talking about one of his films where he mentioned that he didn't care if you loved it. He didn't care if you hated it. But if you were bored by it, then he felt that he failed. But he was totally fine if you walked out of it hating it because he felt like he still accomplished something because he made you feel something. That was his movie Tideland he was specifically talking about, but which I hated. And I love Brazil is like my favorite film, but that was a very hard film to watch. I'm like, I cannot with this movie. But it still worked, and I think that's where these can still fit into that under that umbrella.
Yeah. And I don't know, for some of these that start to get, especially once we get into like the CGI phase of these, it really loses some of that power because they start to get overly cheesy with it. And I think the ones that have been successful since that turning point, right around probably about 2012 to 2014, is really like this confluence of just a glut of really bad films, but a couple that are just truly amazing. The ones that are successful after that are kind of miraculous, and I've really found a lot of enjoyment in and found, I don't know, a way just to extra appreciate the work that goes into doing something when there's so many easy ways to just cut corners now and find a way to do like CGI blood splatter that if you're going through all the trouble to make it feel like you're shooting from a point of view and be hyper realistic, why are we wasting money to not have a couple blood packs? Come on.
Yeah, give us that sense of that visceral feeling where we're actually there. That's part of what makes these work so well. A few other elements that I think are just important to talk about that I think you can see the trail of the origins as we get to, especially when we get to kind of like that late aughts. First of all, in the 90s, we had this rise of reality television where people wanted to watch people doing whatever, right? That kind of became a thing that was huge, with MTV's Real World. I mean, suddenly we're like, yeah, let's just sit around and watch people, and this is something that they bring up in Found Footage Phenomenon, that documentary, is that rise of YouTube and suddenly how that explosion of what people could do on YouTube and taking the reality TV world and bringing that to what people want to watch. And everybody is suddenly totally fine with watching shaky cam and, all this, lo-fi type of filmmaking. And that's kind of become all of our norm.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that can be done well, but again, like I mentioned earlier, so often with found footage, the norm is just sort of not even up to snuff. A little bit of pun on snuff films there, but not up to a quality that in many eras of filmmaking would have even been released as a film, because they're just not able to be successful in the storytelling or in probably the mission that they set out to tell through making that film to begin with. I don't know, it's an odd found footage phenomenon, I'll say.
Very true. Very true. I see what you did there. Well, I like to talk about like where things fit in the cinematic family tree that all of these movies, fit in. And I already mentioned how that it kind of has become its own subgenre. But something that I think is interesting is how it also plays with other horror subgenres. And we're going to talk about some of those. But like monster movies, definitely a lot of supernatural, slasher films, zombie films. I think it's interesting how you can, and this, I suppose, really kind of plays with any subgenres, but the idea of combining different subgenres really allows you to kind of expand the possibilities. So suddenly you can have a number of different unique hybrid experiences, I guess we'll say.
Yeah, there's a lot that, we mentioned screen life films, mockumentaries in themselves, these streaming films. There are all these interesting ways to I tend to call them micro genres. There's literally these groups of, like, I can probably only think of maybe 10 or 12 movies that fit in this micro genre, but they're so unique and singular. It almost works and is necessary to discuss them as their own thing. And as this, if we're moving forward and something is going to be in this micro genre, we should be able to call out those tropes the same way that we call it out in anything else, and talk about how these are successful and maybe another micro genre is less successful. And the hybrid aspects of these is truly what can push a lot of these forward. And, some of the ones that we're going to talk about tonight that you already mentioned, adding a giant monster to a found footage movie sort of changed the game for a lot of people. That was probably the second of like, oh, this can be legit for way different things than I imagined with the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah. It's a very different type of feel. And that kind of continues that evolution and really pushing the boundaries. And then comes the struggle of figuring out, how do we keep it fresh? Can we just keep doing that? Can budgets get bigger and bigger? Can Hollywood take over the found footage style and just be churning out bigger budget things? Obviously not. It really didn't work out for Hollywood to kind of keep doing that. But I just think that as technology and all of our media consumption habits continue evolving, it's interesting to see how found footage has found ways to kind of adapt and stay relevant. And I mean, the documentary points out it may not be as easy to make one anymore. And I think that's kind of a key part, because in the age of social media streaming, what we believe anymore these days, is it still possible, to even really make an effective found footage, or has it gotten to a point where it's almost too hard now?
Right. One thing that I think might be important to provide some context behind this documentary that we keep referring to, and I don't know if you know this aspect. So this documentary was directed by Phil Escott and a collaborative partner with Phil. Phil is a producer at Second Sight Films over in the UK, a boutique physical media company. He also owns a company called Fractured Visions, another boutique physical media company over in the UK. And if you follow Second Sight Films closely over the last 4 years or so, one thing that you can tell from this documentary is that they were releasing about 5 or 6 of these movies. And Phil just went, I have an idea. I'm already going to have all these filmmakers. Let's just get them together for like a broader story. And so we're getting already this curatorial aspect of a company that's getting rights to these specific films they want to release. And then he's coming into the scope a little bit closer to say, well, 5 of these are found footage. Let's see if we can make something fun out of it. And so you get this potentially slightly biased look at found footage through very specific filmmakers. However, the documentary does have a lot of valuable things to say, especially for people that are very new to this. And, I'm sorry, I'm the physical media whore, I guess. I do want to shout out, if anybody is at all interested in physical media, Second Sight Films is probably my favorite physical media company in the entire world. They put a lot of love into these things. Specifically, their release of the Blair Witch Project is one of the best physical media releases potentially ever.
Wow.
Literally. Like there's so much that went into that. The book is giant. The special features, the amount of work that they did to respect the producers of the film, which Lionsgate in the US never was able to legitimize the film in a way that was really felt back in 1999 when it was, this underground college campus phenomenon that it was taking the world by storm. And Second Sight, almost 25 years later, literally swooped in and said, listen, we'll make you feel great. We're going to give this the respect it deserves. And I don't know that any release of that film could ever dream of doing something as good as that.
Wow, that's great to hear. I'm going to have to pick that up now because I'm so curious about that. I am always curious though about like restorations of these types of films that are so low budget. It's like, I mean, I don't know how they release that one, if it's 4K or if it's just, just a Blu-ray, but it does make me wonder. It's like, how far can you go in a 4K restoration of some of these lo-fi sorts of movies? But hey, you know what? At least they're putting love into it and kind of trying to take care of it and give it the love that it deserves. So that's great.
It is not a 4K disc, just so you know. And they did not add anything to it. It is restored in a way that went back to the original tapes and cleaned it up as best as they could. So
nice.
Yes.
Nice. That's very nice to hear. All right, well, we'll be right back, and then we'll continue talking about some more components and start getting into the films. Here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
What's up, most excellent friends?
It's Chrissy and Nathan from the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast.
It's a podcast where a filmmaker and a comedian
And their most excellent guests
adventure their way through the 80s movies we think we love
or might have missed
with our grown-up eyes to see how they hold up.
Join us for delightful discussion,
Rollicking recaps.
ratings, and deep-cut recommendations.
Plus, members get some extra fun chit-chat with the hosts after the show.
Download the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast today at truestory.fm.
Or find it wherever the finest podcasts are stored.
And do remember to keep the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast motto in mind.
Be excellent to each other and...
Party on.
Party on, dudes.
All right, let's start jumping into the components. One thing I found interesting is over on the Wikipedia page for this, it listed 6 main techniques used in found footage films, and it said they often use one or more of these techniques. The first is the first-person perspective, which seems pretty obvious in the case of these. The next is pseudo-documentary, and then mockumentary. Now, I was like, what's the difference? Pseudo-documentary, I guess, is more serious, whereas the mockumentary is a little bit more satirical, kind of playing with it. Usually that's what you get with like Christopher Guest's type of mockumentaries, things like that. So I don't know. I would think maybe we're not seeing quite as much mockumentary in these as much as pseudo-documentary, but I guess that there's still room for mockumentary in them, especially when you look at something like The Visit, which I think might have some of that in there.
I think a good example of that one would probably be The Last Exorcism, for those that have never seen it. It's about a priest that is trying to prove that what he does is a sham, and while trying to prove that, discovers that it's less of a sham than he thought.
That's a fun one. We actually had the actor Patrick Fabian on our show, Movies We Like, which was a fun conversation talking about his experience on that and one of his favorite movies, which was The Man Who Would Be King.
Ah, nice.
Yeah. Other elements of these techniques: news footage, surveillance footage, and screen life. And so I think in the scope of this, let's just kind of like talk about how these techniques really kind of lend to that signature style. I mean, I feel like it's kind of obvious, but it's worth a little bit of a conversation as far as like, the first person surveillance news footage aesthetics and everything.
I think one of the big ones with the news aesthetics that a lot of people still haven't seen is The Last Broadcast. This is arguably the predecessor of the Blair Witch Project and truly allowed the Blair Witch Project to exist in the way that it does. It's the first thing that sort of feels like the infamous War of the Worlds radio broadcast where people thought it was real. It was played very realistic with actual individuals from the BBC being used as these people essentially reporting on something that is totally fake, but not told to everybody, and delivered in such a uniquely horrifying way. Honestly, if you took it at face value, it is something that is hyper realistic, like we were talking about earlier, which can make you get lost in some of these. And so, yeah, totally lends itself to the found footage aspect.
Well, and we see a number of these different things throughout. I think that there's such interesting things to include, like that the news footage style that will certainly come up when we talk about Rec, surveillance footage style we'll talk about with Paranormal Activity, and they're all kind of used to enhance that sense of authenticity. You can get to a point where, perhaps it's harder to buy into as far as like the reality of the breaking the fourth wall, looking at our reality of somebody figuring out how to gather all this footage to actually create something that we're watching. The example I always think of with this is something like Chronicle, which, I really enjoy Chronicle as like a found footage sci-fi film. But it's like, who's out there collecting phone footage from all these people? Like, they really take it to extremes on that one.
Yeah, I like that one too, specifically for the timeline of when that came out, because the superhero aspect had not been driven into the ground every 3 months with another movie. And it's still an exciting watch, specifically if you saw it in theaters then. It was like, oh, this, again, feels kind of dangerous in a way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And done in a way where, obviously there's a lot of flying around and stuff like that, but the CG otherwise was kind of minimal. I mean, you get some like crushing of cars and stuff like that, but it's not played like as big as we get into something like Cloverfield, which is a lot of CG running around in that one.
Right.
Well, let's start digging into the movies. The first one we're going to talk about is Ruggero Deodato's 1980 film, Cannibal Holocaust. This film is a controversial Italian film that follows a rescue team searching for a missing documentary crew in the Amazon rainforest. The film is known for its graphic violence and its use of found footage, which was a novel technique at the time. As the team uncovers the crew's footage, they discover the horrifying truth behind their disappearance and the atrocities they committed. What's interesting about this, and I had forgotten, is that the entire thing isn't found footage. It really is kind of this news style story that we're following of this other group that wants to figure out what happened with this group that went down to the rainforest, and gives us kind of that wraparound story as we're kind of before they get down there and actually get all this footage, which is the actual found footage. Ostensibly more setup than we get in a lot of found footage films, where it's just like, here's footage that you're watching, and this is that story on the outside of that. And I find that actually a fascinating element to this.
Yeah, in a way, this is that we had just mentioned the different methods. This is like a pseudo documentary about a pseudo documentary. In a way, it's sort of built in, and a hard watch for many people that didn't grow up in the time of Blair Witch. They grew up slightly before that. Many of them will tell you this was their first found footage film that they've seen, because for most people, and at that time it was the first one that was done like this. And we could belabor the point for a long time, but the fact that there's real animal violence steers a lot of people away from this movie. And again, I'm going to mention this probably 38 more times, so I'm sorry in advance, but physical media horror, big fan of how some of these companies lately are releasing comprehensive versions of these. So, for example, Cannibal Holocaust has been released on Blu-ray in a way where you can watch the film intact, uncut, the way it was, seen in the theater and all that. Or they have a cruelty-free version, and it takes the stuff that was real animal cruelty and it's just simply omitted. You can watch that without worry that you're going to be subjected to something that's crazy. I mean, the turtle scene in this specifically is horrifying. And some of this, we mentioned at the beginning that there was some that they had to go to court. Ruggero Deodato was called in front of the high court and literally had to bring the actors and say, no, look, they're alive. I didn't kill them on camera. And this movie has some things that still to this day do not look like they should be possible on film to pull off. And because of the found footage aspect, it delivered it in such a realistic way that people, like, their lives were changed. They were scandalized. They'd never seen anything like this, on top of the really gross animal cruelty in between that made you feel already off guard and just completely put off by that. And then when you think you're actually watching somebody be killed, it's gonna mess up your night.
Yeah, I forgot how difficult to watch it is. I mean, I hate anything with animal cruelty. It's so hard for me to get through, but I just have to keep telling myself, this was a long time ago.
Right.
It's long since, like, they've long since suffered, and it's just here now, and I just have to get through this. Same thing with Wake and Fright. I have the same problem watching that movie. It's just like any of these, but it's so hard to get through those scenes. But as you kind of brought up earlier on, one of the fascinating elements about this is it somehow makes all of the other stuff feel that much more real, because we're seeing this real horrific killing of these animals. And then suddenly it's like, now we're watching a guy brutalizing a woman who supposedly had been with another man and killing her. And like, we're seeing some stuff that it's like, okay, how much of that was true? And that makes all of those scenes that much more uncomfortable.
Yeah, and some of the infamous scenes from this, like the impaling scene specifically, is a shot that people have built as figurines that are just incredibly well made. Literally, there's like hand painted figurines of that shot out there. That people
what a
are
weird
still
thing
amazed.
to have on your mantelpiece,
right? It's just one of those iconic shots that because it shaped somebody's view of film, it will live with them forever. And what better way to memorialize that?
And one of the downsides, particularly with this film, is how it shaped people's impressions of indigenous populations in Latin America, because like people are making these vast assumptions about these people that really was unfair. And I think that's a frustrating element. The upside, I guess we'll say, if we can find one, is that, again, we have that outside story of these people, and the filmmakers themselves are so sickened by the way that these people are behaving and how they're abusing these indigenous tribes and everything, that they refuse to show the footage and say, burn it, nobody should see this. So at least on the outside, and maybe that's Deodato's voice coming in as a filmmaker saying, let's at least let people know we don't think this is actually okay.
I can't wait to hear the CinemaScope episode on the Italian and Spanish cannibal films. When's that coming in?
Yeah, right. We'll dive into the cannibal exploitation. Oh,
yeah.
My goodness. Yeah.
It's a rough genre. I mean, the reality, though, at the heart of it, they're sort of exploiting the preconceived notions of people that were going to the film in a way that just damaged everything so much more. And some of it was meant to be titillating. Some of it was meant to legitimately feel dangerous. Some of it was meant to just shock people in a way that was going to leave a lasting impression and make their name as a filmmaker even bigger. I don't like any of those movies anymore. I don't really, other than Cannibal Holocaust, there's not one of them that I've sat down with in the last 10 years and went, I'm glad I watched this again.
Yeah, even this one's a little tough, but still, yeah. I am glad that I am glad I watched it again, because I do find it so interesting in how it fits into all of this, and really is a great way to set up this conversation about found footage horror, because that is exactly what this is. Like, it's horrific what we're seeing here. And I think it's fair to say that there is a legacy that this film has left and impacted a lot of filmmakers who have come since, leading to kind of horror films themselves, but also the found footage.
Well, I mean, this is going to sound silly to describe it like this, but what happened to Deodato in response to this with going to the court, there are filmmakers that would dream of that kind of publicity if they were forced to prove that their stuff was faked, or it's like one of those classic things. They would dream that their film would be banned in 17 countries and they could put that on the poster. It's such a silly era, but it's one of those things where Deodato is like the grandfather of this genre, and now people strive to do as realistic as they can sometimes.
Yeah, right. Let's shift gears and start talking about the big one that we've mentioned a number of times, the Blair Witch Project from 1999, directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. This film follows 3 student filmmakers who venture into the Maryland woods to investigate the local legend of the Blair Witch. The film is presented as the recovered footage of their ill-fated expedition, which ends with their mysterious disappearance. The movie's viral marketing campaign and realistic style made it a cultural phenomenon, which is, I remember when this came out. I remember the movie poster in the theater and just standing in front of the poster and reading the text on it and going, wait a minute, is this a documentary? Like, just the poster, made me question if it was a real film or not. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, and again, this was on the brink of the internet age taking over, and so with word of mouth just traveling in a way that felt sort of, hey, like hushed whispers behind closed doors of, hey, did you hear this? There's this movie coming out where people actually died, and it became a real thing for a lot of people. But further than that, watching this movie, this is one of those movies that really epitomizes the idea in horror of those, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So many people that look back at that think in their mind that it's much, much gorier than it is, that it's a much bloodier film. Blair Witch Project, because of this reputation that it had, people that watched it and couldn't see it on the TV or on a VHS, 3 months later, looked back on it and went, God, this movie was horrifying. There's so much that happens in this movie. And a lot of people, when they watched it again for the first time a couple years later, they went like, oh, wait, I remember a lot more. there's like very little gore. There's not much else that happened. There's a couple memorable scenes, but yeah, this is mostly just a bunch of people lost in the woods.
Yeah, right. And depending on how well you can tolerate the 3 characters may work better for you or may not work at all for you, because you're just hanging out with these 3 people lost in the woods for the bulk of the film. But for me, what I find fascinating, and I think this speaks to why this film can still work. And, I do think this is a film that benefits from big screen treatment or like isolated treatment, watching it like on a screen in your house all in one fell swoop. It isn't a film that works if you're allowing yourself all sorts of distractions, because you have to get into the tone of what the story is doing, and you have to feel it, because if you start kind of going along for the ride with these 3 characters as they're just panicking because they're getting lost, and then they start seeing these weird little piles of rocks and these weird stick figures hanging in the trees, it's just unsettling. And I think that's why I find it effective, is because that feeling of unease just keeps creeping up. And then by the time the tent is shaking and everything like that, it is quite haunting the way that they build the tension in this, if you get yourself into that situation where you can go along for the ride.
And that's truly the thing here. This is sort of a masterclass in like minimalist writing, because you're seeing these characters developed and frustrating you as they go along with things like, are we traveling in a circle? Where's the map? All these other things that happen. And yet, because of the time that they spent, talking to those couple of townspeople in the beginning and really setting the welcome mat for what you're about to accomplish, looking back on the fact that a world was terrorized by somebody standing in a corner. That's it. That's all the scariest part of this movie is. That is incredible filmmaking. If you can make that a haunting scene, man, the audience is in the palm of your hand for anything.
Yeah. Again, going back to my point, like if you're really in it, because it was the very beginning of the film where you get that little conversation with these random people about the legend of the Blair Witch, and that's where you hear about like they would stand the kids in the corner. Like, you've got to be paying attention to hear that, otherwise that last bit doesn't make any sense to you. And so this film benefits from just being focused and just really getting into it. And these filmmakers, I think, just tapped into something that just, I don't know, this might feel the most realistic of like any of the films that we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, I mean, especially as far as stories go, because there's nothing visibly supernatural. There's no, as far as I'm aware, there's no even special effects in this. This is literally just a bunch of people making a very atmospheric, creepy story told perfectly. And like the next one we're going to talk about, some of these have built-in fright, but this one, it does so much with so little, and that in itself kind of proves the idea of found footage.
This is an interesting one also. And, I'm going to say this. I actually haven't done any research on this, but this one is the last one that I can think of where we're actually seeing a blending of film and video, where the film is intended, like they are going out there to make a film on 60 millimeter, filming it, capturing it all. So we have that footage, and then we have all their video footage, which is just what they're just filming, all their conversations, just everything about documenting what they're doing. That might be the last time, it's the last time I can remember where we're actually kind of getting a blending of those two formats, especially because at this point, film, again, becomes more of a luxury item that people aren't necessarily going to pay for.
Yeah, of those two specifically, I think you're right. By that point, especially these people that are working on no budgets, being able to pay for film is a pipe dream for most of them.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about Rec. This is a Spanish film directed by Jaume Balagueró and Paco Plaza. In this Spanish horror film, a TV news crew follows firefighters on a routine call to an apartment building, only to find themselves trapped inside with a terrifying virus that turns people into essentially aggressive zombies. This film is shot entirely from the perspective of the news crew camera. This also may be the only one I can think of that has been remade. Quarantine is the remake. That was what I saw first. Love that movie. And then I saw this, and I don't know. I love both of them. I think that it's just a solid story delivered exceptionally well. Rec is a little more taut. And so I think on this most recent watch, it kind of bumped its way up to kind of my favorite between the two. But it's I don't know, a really solid story. And what I like about this is we're tapping into the zombie subgenre, which I always enjoy zombie movies. And it's a news story. So we're kind of following a news crew as they go around filming their TV show while you're sleeping. And the claustrophobia of this one just keeps getting tighter and tighter and tighter as the story progresses. This is probably my favorite of the whole bunch of films we're talking about.
Wow. Honestly, it would probably be somewhere top 3 for me as well. I don't know. There's something extra visceral about this one. And I think one of the aspects that truly gets it, and you mentioned the claustrophobia, I think we really can put that into perspective because it's essentially a single location film, just given the fact that we're in an apartment building. So there's many locations in the single location. But it, again, in many of these found footage films, because you're already restricting yourself to a format or a conceit, you're making yourself come up with creative ideas to deliver that successfully. And now, if you're doing that in a single location, you have yet another conceit that you're building into that. And so they have to do certain things, like there's not necessarily long takes like the way that we view them nowadays as, some Mike Flanagan 20-minute thing that he's doing for Netflix. But, there's some of these scenes that they allow the tension to exist, and not just in the Paranormal Activity way of we're going to play a loud noise and think that we're building tension. This is done in a way where you are living with this person that is used to being on-screen professional. They are wanting to be somebody that is, very, very tight, very put together, delivering something to their job. They're doing it for a living, and now they're in this terrible situation. But because we are living in that moment with them, they show 5 different angles from around this individual before they sit for a moment, and then the actual moment of terror exists. And because you've lived through those first build-up moments, this movie can really get to a lot of people. This is another one that's best seen in a dark room. This is best seen, with like you and maybe one other person on a couch kind of close together where you can feel each other jump. And it delivers on so many levels. And I think one of the main aspects, like I mentioned, is the main character is used to being professional. And so you are sort of unraveling with her as the film goes on here. And as she comes into the scene at the very beginning, she is very much on the job. And by, 40 minutes in, she is pure panic. And you are right there with her, just like Blair Witch, if you have given yourself to this movie. And yet this one is a little less believable because it's essentially a zombie story. But man, if you lose yourself in this movie, it is a ride.
Yeah. And one thing that I find so interesting about the film is that because she works for this news show that they're out filming, she and her camera operator, I find myself buying into their use of the camera so much more easily, right?
Right.
Cloverfield, we'll talk about that here in a little bit, is one where I really struggle with that often. But here, it's just like, this is their job. They are they know they have something. They want to make sure they're capturing all this footage because, you start getting these thoughts in your head. She never voices it or anything like that, but Pulitzer, like that sort of stuff, like let's capture it because, I'm here documenting this story and how crazy will it be when we can finally tell the story. And that's something that I never find myself questioning anytime the camera's on in this. It always works for me.
Yeah. Thinking back, I can't even remember the first time I watched this, but something about this movie every single time works. And for found footage, that's kind of an accomplishment. Some of these, after that first viewing, they really lose their luster. This movie is insanity every single time. I love this thing. And honestly, I know we're not going into detail on all of them, but this is a franchise on top of the fact that there's a remake, which also got a sequel. So there's like 6 movies associated with this, I believe. And they're not even all found footage. And one of them, I think, is half found footage, half not. But they're all worth watching. It is a fascinating ride to go on. And just bravo. This movie, everybody should see this at least once.
Yeah. The box set I'm excited to kind of plow through because those other films aren't as easy to find. So I'm very much looking forward to kind of digging into them. Let's talk about Paranormal Activity. This is Oren Peli's film from 2007. Very busy period of time, 2007, 2008.
Yes.
A lot of the films we're talking about came out in that small window here. In this low-budget horror film made by a studio, a couple set up cameras to document the strange occurrences in their home, believing they are being haunted by a malevolent entity. As the nights progress, the supernatural activity becomes increasingly terrifying. Shoestring budget. Paramount Pictures released it. Huge box office success with this thing. But it's so minimal and so relatable. And if it weren't for the final moment, I would love this so much more. What do you think of this one?
This one, I've got a long personal history with, and funny enough, this is another one that's gotten many sequels.
It's crazy how many.
I think I like a couple of the sequels more than this first film. Quite a bit more, probably. I don't know. This movie is interesting because it brought a lot of people to it because it had that groundswell of support that like Blair Witch did. I for a long time, and it may even still hold the record. I did not research that part. I'm sorry. It was for a long time like the biggest money making independent. The way it was shot, and then it was acquired by a studio after, I believe. But like Oren Peli made this without people even knowing that he was making a movie. He just like secretly made this in this house, and to be able to pull that off with like a $15,000 budget is marvelous. And there's some shots in this that I mentioned earlier, the cheap kind of scares that we get here, which this one really relies on the jump scare aspect and you having a pretty decent sound system and this built-in tension that sort of feels like the precursor to Christopher Nolan's annoying boom sound. But Paranormal Activity, it sets the stage where a scare is coming just based on the sound. And so you're sitting here, and because of what they've done to you in the rest of the movie, your eyes are darting throughout all of the security footage that you're looking at. Where's it going to happen? What is going to be the problem this time? And because they've done it in 5 different ways before you get to this scene, it's still pretty effective in quite of those, which is interesting because a scare is coming. There shouldn't be much tension. But again, it's kind of cheap. It's kind of minimalist to a fault in a couple scenes on this, I would say. And then there's a couple things like the baby powder scene that we get a little small aspect of CGI that I just don't really love on this thing. I like the story. I like that it's something that pretty much all of us can relate to. You or your spouse going, did you hear that? And there's something creepy and something weird's going on. And then suddenly you're unsettled for the next 3 or 4 nights. And that aspect alone makes this super approachable. It's just not a win in my book. This is one that is good, not great, but still like a foundation of this format for sure.
Yeah. And I think with this one, we really start getting, or the filmmakers start getting the idea of like security cam footage. It's not exactly security cam footage that we have here. He's basically setting his camera up he's using it during the day, and then at night he sets it up on a tripod to film themselves while they're sleeping to see what it is that's actually happening. And then suddenly we start seeing just like security cam footage. It becomes very prevalent in found footage movies moving forward, because the people are like, yeah, why didn't we have that idea? It's genius, because it allows us to watch these people while they're sleeping. And I think that's why a lot of those horror moments work so well, because as you said, we know the scare is coming, but these people are so completely sleeping and completely unaware to the realities that something's going on. So we're just sitting here watching while the sheet starts moving and puffing up, and then suddenly her leg is free and she is pulled out of bed and down the hallway. It's like, I wasn't expecting that. And it's downright terrifying when you see things like that, because again, this goes to this style of it just working so well, because it just feels so raw and real. And I think that's why, for me, I still count this as a win. I've only seen a few of the sequels, but I find the style to be fascinating. And again, working hard to make it as real as possible, like much as close to what they're doing in Blair Witch as they can, if it weren't, again, for that stupid CG face at the end of the movie. But otherwise, it's like you can buy all of the stuff that's happening. And I mean, the footsteps, I get you on the footsteps as far as what they're doing there, but it just feels like, yeah, I can see what's happening here, and it just feels like it feels real,
Yeah, obviously, talking about the sleeping aspect, I think this is the first movie to truly capture a vulnerability in found footage that, with something like Blair Witch, somebody could literally look at this movie and go, oh, these stupid teenagers, why are they walking into the forest? Like that isn't here. This is somebody asleep and has no control, and they're just going to succumb to whatever happens. The other aspect of this that, you mentioned how it's, why didn't we think of that when we were filmmaking with the security camera footage? One thing that gets overlooked in this so often is this is such a brilliant way to beautifully shoot a film, because you could find a really great shot in this house that you're shooting in and say, well, this is where we're putting a security camera, and now the camera never has to move. I can set up the mise en scène to be exactly how I want it. I know that I can pull a couple things from behind this doorway. I can get this shot of the bed, and suddenly this filmmaker is just brilliant, because you don't have to touch a damn thing. You set this here, and it's literally on like a steel tripod that never has to move again, and that's a huge win for a good filmmaker. Yeah.
And it plays really well, because you really get the sense that this did run all night, because you're seeing like it gets sped up, and which I find very unnerving when she stands up and then she goes and stands, and then everything just speeds up. You see the clock ticking, you see her body kind of moving a little bit. It's like 3 hours of her standing there. I'm like, did they really make that actress like get out of bed and stand there for 3 hours while they just filmed it? Like, exhausting. Like, I find that fascinating. It makes me think, this is the downside, is like my brain goes into like the production mode of like making this, is like, is that what they really did? As opposed to just getting in the story. That's maybe I'm too close to the filmmaking side of things, but
I had the same thought like the second time I watched this, I think, and I always wanted to rip the film and put it into some sort of editing software and change the speed myself and see if I could be like, oh, this is pretty natural movements now. And then you look at the time and go, oh, she only had to do this for 7 minutes. It's no big
right,
deal.
Exactly. Right, yeah. They can very easily fake that as far as but again, that goes into us sensing something that feels like the real world that they can totally manipulate. And it's just like, we're buying it because we see that clock ticking away, and it's like 3 hours later. Wow, that was crazy.
Exactly.
It's smart filmmaking. All right, let's talk about the last film on our list here. And it's a big one. It's Cloverfield, directed by Matt Reeves in 2008. This film follows a group of friends as they navigate the chaos and destruction in New York City during a massive monster attack. The events are captured on a handheld camera, giving the film a first-person perspective and a sense of realism. This is an interesting example. Initially, I was like, it's kind of a sci-fi film. But I was like, you know what? And you were like, you really wanted to talk about it. I'm like, I think you're right. There's this whole monster subgenre, especially the giant monster subgenre that we have in horror films. And especially because suddenly we're jumping to such a big budget, an opportunity to do something that J.J. Abrams is involved with. And here we are with this new perspective on what you can do with found footage. How does this one play for you?
I was not somebody that was raised on monster movies or this type of monster movie necessarily, like the Godzilla or Tokusatsu or anything like that. It wasn't something that was big in my house, but man, Cloverfield really got to me around this time because I'd fallen for the Blair Witch Project. I went back and watched the last broadcast and a couple others and went, man, this is a really cool conceit to be able to do this with the film. And then Cloverfield came and I just mind blown. I think I saw this before I watched Chronicle, and it was really just an expansion of they can really do this with the movie. And I appreciated so much the fact that I think it's like the first 12 minutes of this is just somebody documenting their last day in New York and they're hanging out with friends, nothing crazy. And then there's no cut or anything like that. It's just suddenly chaos. And the way that you live in this world with stuff happening, it's one of those things where on one side, the found footage aspect really makes this an interesting way to capture a completely non-believable story, obviously. But then the other side, I think this is the first movie that is found footage that made me go, okay, listen, why are we really filming still? All of this is happening. Yeah. TJ Miller would not be holding this camera still. And looking back on this, I truly appreciate this movie for so many different reasons. One of them being, I showed my kids this movie. This works really well as like a first horror movie watch and loved it. Both of them were really stoked on it, but it works in so many different ways because it is so frenetic. This is a movie where you are just scattershot across a city in danger in every single situation. You are worried about not only, all these monsters, but the people near you and the situations that you're in and what you're breathing in even. And so the found footage aspect does make you feel grimy in all of these situations in this movie. And you do, as a viewer, feel a lot more vulnerable, I think. But yeah, I think the unbelievable aspects do hurt it a little bit. I'm just glad that it worked and that it seemed to be sort of like that last major pillar in this format for many people. And I think truly holds up. I think this one stands kind of the test of time that this could have been seen as very cheesy. Still works for me.
Of all of them, this is the one that fluctuates as far as and I don't know if it's a mood thing or whatever, but when I watch it, it can either work for me or it can really annoy me. And I think that it's interesting. And I think some of that is the Hollywood gloss to it. Like it feels like we're still supposed to buy that it's like a real story. Like, I don't know, something that works so well in so many of these found footage films for me is that I have this, often it's because the actors I've never seen before, and it just feels like this is something that is real. And I just happened to be, somebody captured it, and now I'm watching this, and it feels like that, again, that kind of whole pseudo-documentary feel. This is like such a big Hollywood scope that there are elements that work. Like I love everything that you're saying about how the film is set up. We kind of are like watching one tape of a relationship before suddenly somebody's accidentally taping over that footage. And we're getting this other story about like a goodbye party a month later and all of this sort of stuff. The way that all of that plays and then suddenly is interrupted in the most bombastic of ways as explosions are ripping through downtown Manhattan a few miles away from where they are, and then suddenly like the Statue of Liberty's head comes crashing through through the air and crashing down the street right next to their apartment.
By the way, they pull that off so well.
It is, except, and this is I think the other complaint that I have with it is like, because we're in this world of found footage, when it goes to CG and I find myself not buying the CG, it pulls me out because it's found footage and I'm supposed to be feeling like it's real world. And I love the effect with the Statue of Liberty. It's when they have the still shot of her head on the street. I'm just like, it doesn't really quite look right. I don't think they quite got that.
Right.
And then I really have that problem when we are dealing with Clover, the monster, later in the film, not to mention all the little babies that are running around and stuff. Like,
oh, yeah.
the CG, and I don't know, I find it interesting. You mentioned this with like when somebody's using CG blood in one of these, and how it's just like, come on. And this obviously they have to use CG in something like this, but I mean, and I can totally let go of it and go along for the ride. I really do enjoy this film. I'm just like as a finding a criticism just because of the conversation is just like, when I really look, that's what bugs me the most is kind of that is dealing with that CG aspect, because I find that it can pull me out of what I'm watching.
It's a bit distracting, especially in about 4 or 5 scenes specifically. I mean, you mentioned the babies, the tunnel scene. There's a couple shots that are super sketchy that just don't quite work necessarily, but at least the fear aspect is still there in those. And so you're already unsettled because something is a little uncanny valley-like in those shots. This one, too, I think we probably should mention, this is easily the closest that we've gotten to the Blair Witch level of marketing. This was a phenomenon. I mean, people had no idea what was coming. The whole team behind this had literally like built a grassroots campaign of everybody has heard of this and everybody's going to want to see this. So much so that, I mean, they filmed a whole other movie and debuted it after the Super Bowl, not even originally meaning for it to be a Cloverfield movie. And that's the third one after they did another one where they tacked on a Cloverfield ending to it, which also worked. And I mean, you even mentioned in, I think it was the comedy episode about John Goodman, like the performances that we get and stuff like that delivers the realistic and believable aspect of that a little bit more because he's so damn good in that second movie, which isn't found footage. But, this one specifically, TJ Miller is not the greatest, but a couple of the other people that are truly like almost believably responding to these unbelievable situations just dials up that notch of realism slightly, at least, in a sea of, mediocre CGI.
Yeah, and that does make it frustrating for me. And it's frustrating because like in a big budget story like this, you can have a bridge sequence, which they have here, which I am totally on board with. Like the terror of like mass exodus across a major bridge and then suddenly a disaster happening on it and the bridge is like falling apart and stuff and you're trying to get off before it collapses. Like that really plays. Like that played exceptionally for me, especially this time. Like I felt the emotion with that. So it's that balance. And it's interesting because this didn't really push Hollywood to crank out a whole bunch of other found footage movies. And I find that to be interesting because I don't know, maybe they just, I guess I'm not really sure. Like, why wouldn't this be something that they would want to try more of on a big scale? Is it just something they're like, oh, it's J.J. Abrams just playing with his mystery box and just doing something that, only he can do? I don't know. I find it odd.
It's a good question. And what's crazy is the independent filmmakers really grabbed onto it and responded with a flood of those films. And some of those are, truly great, have been, building their own reputations that will never be as big as Cloverfield, obviously, because it's Cloverfield. But some of those that, in response to Paranormal Activity and Cloverfield, where they're telling these stories, and not just like the actual filmmaking stories, but the behind the scenes of, again, not to mention the same thing about Paranormal Activity, but a guy in his house with $15,000 can make a movie that 30 million people go see. That is pretty much every independent filmmaker's dream right there. $15,000 is nothing.
That's absolutely what people want, is to be able to like have that hit. But how do you do that? And, I suppose in the scope of it, it's like, especially these days, like how do you achieve that? It's become more and more difficult to get to a place where you can actually make that magic happen.
I mean, shoot, it's more and more difficult just to get an actual distributed release nowadays, let alone a hit. I mean, streaming, a lot of people talk about it being ease and accessibility for a lot of people. I feel like it's kind of been the opposite. We've ruined the cinematic idea where they're limiting that to major blockbusters. Pretty much everything that's in a theater was made for $150 million or $12. There's no in between anymore. And then to get on a streamer, you have to use all of their cameras and have 3 major stars attached just to even get in the door, which sucks.
Yeah, it's there's a whole other conversation there about the way our industry has certainly shifted, which is very true. But I mean, and to your point, it does make it that much more difficult for somebody to like make one of these and actually make a mark with it. It's a very difficult industry right now to kind of crack into. I mean, it's always been hard, but now there's such a glut of stuff that you're competing with. It's very, very tricky.
Yeah, I mean, even the things that used to be, we'll say, few and far between, like film festivals. Now there's so many film festivals and a lot of sham film festivals that it's hard for independent filmmakers to even wade those waters to try.
Yeah, there are so many out there. It's kind of gotten to a point where it's ridiculous, you know.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will be right back. We're going to talk a little bit more about its influences and go from there. Here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Ever wonder where the devil got his horns?
How about those cloven hooves?
Or that pitchfork?
Wasn't he an angel?
No, he was a snake.
No, he's the great red dragon.
No, he's the beast.
He's the prince of this world.
Prince of darkness.
Well, he's the prince of dark.
Good morning, star lovelies. One of my names is Lester Ryan Clark.
And I sometimes go by Keenan Diaz.
And we're the hosts of the brand new podcast, The Devil's Details. What comes to mind when I say Lucifer?
How about Satan?
What about just the devil? How did the big bad of the Western world end up with so many faces? Join us as we dig up, decipher, and deconstruct the devil's many forms throughout history.
Take a guided tour with Dante through the 9 circles of hell.
Or revisit Satan's angsty bad boy years in Paradise Lost.
Learn the ins and outs of a Faustian contract.
Easier than a 1099, but with a hell of a lot more fine print.
Slither on over to The Devil's Details on True Story FM and join us in the diabolic discussion.
Love and hisses. Mwah! Didn't Al Pacino play him in a movie?
Are you sure that wasn't Robert De
I could
Niro?
have sworn it was Tim Curry.
That was Elizabeth
Didn't
Hurley.
he go down to Georgia at some point?
So talking about like the influence that found footage has had, I mean, it did gain mainstream acceptance, which is great. I think it's a fascinating format. I think that there's a lot of complaints to be had with it. People still, like we've talked about, the struggle of like, why are they filming still, right? You have these sorts of things. But we've talked about it, like how it's harder to succeed with this technology as audiences' expectations continue to evolve. I mean, how do you think filmmakers can actually use this to kind of innovate and keep this subgenre fresh?
It's a great question. I think that we're seeing a lot of success in some of those micro genres that we referred to earlier. So probably a good time to discuss things like the screen life films. I know in COVID, when obviously production was already really difficult to get people in the same rooms and, all the testing that had to be done and everybody that was on set for all that, something like Host was able to be successful in a way that, sure, it's a 58-minute film, but for a lot of people, it is still by far the most effective sort of screen life, not necessarily streaming because they're just sort of on video calls to each other. Really great version of the story that they can still do some really great effects with and pull off a very compelling story that was centered around COVID at the time. Another one that's is not necessarily horror, but to be able to make a movie like Searching with John Cho and be able to use all these aspects of like recorded phone calls and news footage that you're pulling off the internet to see a video and watching clues where they left them in their photo gallery because they took a video on their phone, sort of building that case to lead to a story. In a way, for a lot of people, this is sort of like a true crime mystery horror movie. Searching is quite effective. And that was the first time that for a film like that, I think they actually pulled it off for the most part. There's a lot of aspects of that could have been lost in the weeds. And I think that the filmmaker made some wise decisions and didn't oversaturate it with voices that didn't need to be heard. But yeah, I think blending some of these super tiny micro genres or taking a risk on a new technology, like we discussed, like the Twitch streaming aspect, something like Deadstream is such a unique look at literally just a regular old haunted house movie. But because there's a camera around this guy's neck, it changes the way that you even approach how the story is not just going to be told, but how the viewer is going to be looking at it. Are they going to be, are they even going to be siding with our narrator? Or is he like a terrible host that they kind of hope bites it? It's one of those things that it's got to be a question. What is the motivation behind every scene that you're setting up for a film like this? And yeah, it is technically found footage in multiple ways. but it's a very different style than Cannibal Holocaust or Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, those styles are so fascinating because it really taps into, like, again, screen life. We're staring at a computer. Like, that's the whole idea. I think it was Timur Bekmambetov who, like, when he did Unfriended, or was producing, I think, Unfriended, had the idea like, it has to feel like you never leave your computer screen. And so that idea of like, you're watching, like, you've got the count of views on one side, you've got comments, running through, like on Deadstream, you got just all those comments, which are so fun to read. We definitely get a hint of that when we'll talk about Gonjam Haunted Asylum, when we talk about that in our member content. But I think that is really the evolution, and we're seeing where things are going, because there has been such a rise of screen life. I mean, that's how all of us live essentially now. But it's even blurring that line between real and fake footage even more. And I think that's what's, I don't know, dangerous. I'm not really sure, but like, it's hard to maintain a sense of authenticity and immersion, really, because it's like, I don't know, people are so cynical, I guess, as they watch things. It's like, are they going to get themselves into the story?
Yeah, and that's where a lot of these are, because it's about like a streamer, I guess, like with Deadstream, it all sort of falls on that main character. Are they a reliable narrator? Are they somebody that we are empathetic to? And for some movies that doesn't matter. Like Deadstream, you kind of hate the guy for like half the movie, and then eventually you're like, oh, now I kind of feel bad a little bit. But
yeah, right.
There are some other movies that have been making the rounds, like on Shudder, that they're setting this person up to be hated the entire time. And for some people, it kind of colors the way they've seen these movies. I've found a lot of people, like, commenting on them on my show. They will say, because I didn't like the main character, I was never going to like the movie, which I kind of find fascinating, because it truly is like the center of this framing that we're doing. However, you're not meant to be empathetic to every main character. Like, we have anti-heroes. I mean, we all watch Taxi Driver and go, dang, he's a great actor. It's not, dang, I want to be Travis Bickle. There's a lot going on that in a film you should be able to separate those two. But with streaming, it's like real life. There's so many of us that know really shitty social media personalities that stream every single day of their life. And so that, like you said, is starting to blur the line. And so many of us can relate, because, man, I used to watch that person for 6 months until they were terrible. Are you watching somebody get terrible right before your eyes, and you hope that this ghost in the upstairs bedroom just eats them?
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, yeah, and that speaks kind of to some ethics in this, as far as like, we're painting these stories. I mean, again, we're watching all of this stuff in real life now, and often questioning what people are saying, what people are doing. And now here we're in the situation, and it's interesting as a way to kind of like come around full circle, because we talked about that earlier with Cannibal Holocaust, and how the filmmakers who found the footage, they are expressing their own ethical concerns about what those people did. And here we are now in a situation where it's like the audience and us, it's like, and just, I mean, people who are holding their phones up every time they see any sort of confrontation, phones are up, they're filming it just in case they get something juicy that they can post. We're in this world now where like everything seems real. And I mean, what, I don't know, this might be too big of a conversation to delve into, but just like the ethical concerns when it comes to like marketing tactics, or even just the production style when you're making something that's real.
It's a great question. I mean, on that front, we've sort of jumped the shark a long time ago with how many things are, they've got that black card before we even go into the film that says these are based on a true story or inspired by a true story. Most of the time, those are a lie. It's not something, it's just there for you to set your mindset up to go, oh, this is a little more real than Forrest Gump when I watched it. These are the type of films that will mess with people and gain a reputation of somebody that didn't do any research and go, well, god dang, that movie was real. It's a story that I heard once or whatever. I mean, you could talk about the marketing for Blair Witch. People all over just leaned into the fact that, oh yeah, these college kids are dead. Cannibal Holocaust, the marketing behind this movie, banned in so many countries, and we had to go to court to prove that these people are real. where do we draw that line? Where is it okay to lean heavily into that, and when are we literally lying to an audience?
It's a fascinating line, and I think, I don't know, I look at the possible, like, how can this subgenre evolve in this world where everything is questioned, everything is so easy to like research and find information now, but I can't help but feel like that's the way in moving forward, is to find a way to tap into exactly that. People buy into everything at a whim. So make something that about people buying into something, like that's how you tap into it. And I think that's, I don't know, I guess I haven't seen that next step of found footage where people are, I mean, it's such a dangerous potential market for doing that now. It might not be the smartest type of storytelling to do with people buying into the things that it so easily. But that's, I think, an interesting potential future for this. If it is going to find a way to continue, I think that's going to be one of the things that they're going to have to tap into and figure out.
At the risk of derailing this slightly, because it's not found footage whatsoever, I would really think that one of the great examples to point to this in recent time is the film Red Rooms. Did you get a chance to see that one?
No, I didn't.
I believe it's a French-Canadian film, and it's a woman that is attending a court hearing. Like, this is an ongoing trial. She is here to see somebody that is up for murder. This is somebody that is suspected of killing multiple people, and we see some home interactions with this woman where she is living a very minimal life, and online she is somebody that's just super deep into the true crime aspect, and she's found places online where you can like use Bitcoin to buy videos of people being murdered, and it tells a story in a truly brilliant way and goes into it doesn't like speak on it in the film, but because of the way the film progresses, naturally anybody with a quarter of a brain walking out of Red Rooms can start to think like, wait a minute, about a third of the way into this movie, I was sort of enjoying it. Am I just as bad as the other people that are in this? Am I somebody that just paid $15 for a movie ticket that wanted to just get you excited about watching somebody die? And the story goes in ways that are deeply innovative. I think it's done in a way that feels very fresh. Some of the best acting in the last 3 or 4 years I've seen. Highly, highly underseen film. It's got a really great reputation from those that have seen it. Most people tend to love it. I think in the U.S., most places didn't get it till 2024, but I think it came out in 2023 elsewhere. So definitely need to look into that. It's an incredible movie, and I think people that are even fairly interested in like the screen life type of movies or the true crime aspect, it's a movie that could help push some of your comfort zone boundaries.
Interesting. I will have to check that one out because, again, you're right. I mean, it sounds like it's not going to be a found footage, but in the scope of finding ways to tap into where we are now, that sounds like exactly what I'm talking about. Like, how can you tap into that to advance this particular story? It's really interesting, and I am very much looking forward to seeing how filmmakers kind of continue navigating it, Last question, and I suppose this is just kind of like a plug because, we have been talking, again, as I said, I really do feel like this has become kind of a horror, like its own subgenre of just like a type of horror. But there are a lot of different found footage films that aren't horror. And I wanted to see if you had any other favorite examples that were worth calling out, just so people who may want to look at something that's not necessarily horror, that they could also check out.
A big one for me, who was raised in Southern California, who loved the show Cops. My uncle was an LAPD detective when was on an episode of Cops. Anyways, a weird lead in to say, I truly do not like David Ayer, but the film End of Watch is a magnificent feat of filmmaking that should not work in the way that it does. A lot of it is unbelievable, but truly the chemistry between the two leads, primarily Jake Gyllenhaal, who is astonishing in pretty much everything that he touches. This movie is so damn good. It is such an interesting blend of clearly like realistic things that you probably saw on these cop shows growing up to something that just would never happen the way that they're showing in the movie. And it's a really interesting story. Just I kind of wish it was somebody that wasn't David Ayer. But honestly, Chronicle is still one of my favorites. It's one that I go back to at least every couple of years because it felt so... I've used this a couple times tonight, but like genuinely dangerous. It felt like it's some teenagers that got a little too much power, and to show how that could, sort of corrupt you quickly, the way that we've, all heard throughout these novels of like Animal Farm and these crazy things of kids going crazy on islands and books we're required to read in 11th grade. But this thing is just, it's an astonishing way to deal with the conceit of found footage. And it was just barely in that time frame of this might be sort of a believable story to see, because now like the iPhone gets announced right around when this comes out and people go, oh, like cameras in everybody's pocket is likely about to happen. This is about to be a real big thing. And so this isn't the sort of Blair Witch Project, we're going into the woods with a video camera intent on filming something. This is more like we're just a bunch of friends in a shopping center parking lot gonna try to do something cool, and this is what it turns us into. And that in itself is vulnerable and terrifying and really, really easy to corrupt somebody.
Yeah, it's a fascinating film, and it plays so well still. Like it taps into kind of that high school mentality of people who end up with something that gives them too much power. And as we know, with great power comes great responsibility, which they don't have.
I've heard that before, yeah.
Yeah, right. I just want to throw out a really interesting one that is very indie, low budget, but it's called Lunopolis. I don't know if that's one that you've heard of before, but it is a sci-fi film about two filmmakers who... they find this mysterious device and they start kind of digging into this conspiracy about people living on the moon and who are from the future, and they time traveled back and they're living there and changed our history and all sorts of stuff. And on top of that, there's this very powerful organization that starts chasing them as they start digging into the secret. It's definitely indie, but it's a really creative non-horror take on the found footage style of filmmaking. And it's, I don't know. I like playing it. It's definitely worth checking out.
Definitely one I got to see. And one that I'll just really quickly mention, because I know it has a lot of bad reputations from people that I don't even think ever really saw the movie. But just a real quick thing, Project X is a much better movie than people give it credit for. It came out at a weird time. It was probably just slightly ahead of its time. If it came out 5 years later, it probably would have been much more appreciated. That movie is genuinely brilliant filmmaking.
I need to add that one to my list. That's one that I saw the trailer and I was like, yeah, I'll skip that one. But
it is so much better.
Your recommendation, I'll check it out. Yeah. Interesting.
Good stuff.
Well, Ryan, this has been a fantastic conversation about the world of found footage horror films. Thank you so much for joining me for all of this.
Thank you. Been an honor. I love listening to the show, and it's surreal to be here with you.
Well, tell people about what you're up to, where they can find you, give some plugs so people can track you down and subscribe to what you're publishing, all that good stuff.
I thought we were pulling this to a close, but this is going to be another half hour. Sorry.
No, you are a busy person. That's fair.
I am everywhere on social media under the name The Disc Connected. And as the name implies, and I've said too many times during the show already, I am all about physical media. So films on disc still, Blu-rays, 4Ks, that sort of thing. I work with companies all over the world to produce special features, to hire people to write on some of these films. I help do a lot of editing behind the scenes for what is going to be on the discs. And as a part of that, it has exploded my life. I mean, I've got a very active YouTube channel where I try, historically, I used to post interviews once a week with somebody in the industry, but I've gotten so busy now it's once every couple months, it feels like. But the big thing is the most consistent aspect of my life is every single Thursday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, I am live going over all of the English language physical media announcements that have happened in the last week. And some weeks that's 25, 30 titles, and other weeks it's literally 115. And we are going to go through all of the details on all of them, and it's me and a guest that is from this industry, or a podcaster, or somebody from one of these labels that put these films out, or a filmmaker themselves. And after we go through all the announcements and talk about the fun aspects of the physical media, we always want to bring it back around to film some way. So after that, we have a conversation on a director, or an actor, or a genre, or a trope, or our favorite physical media releases of the year, to highlight some aspects of those that are great. Something interesting so that people that are there for the physical media can love it, but also remember we're really only focused on these because film is the heartbeat of what is going through all these. So
absolutely.
I truly appreciate doing that every single week, and it's a great time. Like I mentioned earlier, it's can be a long show. It's at least 2 hours every week, but I've gone over 6 hours a couple times. I put that out as a podcast the next morning every single week. I also work with some of these labels to put out podcasts to tell the stories behind the films they're releasing, how they found the films, how they restored them, the special features that are on there, lots of other stuff. You can check out all those shows at someone'sfavoriteproductions.com. And the last thing I'll bring up, I in 2023 realized that it was the best time to get into print media and started a physical magazine about physical media and film. And so I have something that I put out about 10, 12 times a year called the Physical Media Advocate. I get writers from all over the world, and me and my editor put together usually somewhere between 40 to 65 pages of a list of release dates for that month that we're working on for physical media, highlighting some of the best things that you may not have heard of that's coming out, but also bringing out some classic Hollywood people to talk about their best releases on physical media, or giving a 5,000 word deep dive into the film industry in Hong Kong in the 90s and how they exploded. We've gone down some really incredible paths, and I don't know how we've been able to put it together, but it's turned into this thing that some idiot kid in Kansas City, Missouri has this magazine on stands across the U.S. in 10 or 12 different retail stores. There's a store in Canada that carries it. It's on Amazon all over the world. The Physical Media Advocate. Check it out if you're into holding a hard copy release about film or physical media.
That's awesome. I love that you're working so hard to promote all of that. It's exciting to see how that boutique industry is shaped, or it continues to evolve right now. It's very cool. So, and nice to see.
It's a weird world that a lot of people know nothing about. So I'm trying to share the information behind it.
Right. Exactly. No, I love it. It's awesome. Well, again, Ryan, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And before we close, don't forget about our special bonus segment. For those of you who are members, we're going to be taking a look at 5 more found footage horror films to further deepen our understanding of this groundbreaking movement. Lake Mungo, The Visit, Hell House LLC, Gonjam Haunted Asylum, and Host. If you're not yet a member, but you want to join us on this extended exploration, visit truestory.fm/join and find the Next Reel family of film podcasts to access the exclusive content. Next month, we're actually kicking off a summer hiatus, but we're going to be back with more conversations about genres, subgenres, and film movements in the fall. Until then. Thanks for joining us on CinemaScope, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. Music by Orcus and the Magnetic Buzz. Find us and the entire Next Reel family of film podcasts at truestory.fm/join. Follow us on social media at The Next Reel, and please rate and review us if your podcast app allows. As we part ways, remember, your cinematic journey never ends. Stay curious.